Good afternoon and welcome to Education Live, a Cengage Group's LinkedIn Live series. And today we will be discussing the stigma that surrounds career and technical education. And not only how it impacts lives of people, but also how that stigma impacts the economy. In a recent report at Cengage, we published the finding that 58% of all high school graduates never considered any other alternative path to a traditional degree. So that stigma is alive and well and is at work, and even makes people not consider an alternative that they have, and an alternative that we will talk about in a bit more detail today. So in trying to tackle this stigma, I couldn't think of two more knowledgeable and interesting people to talk about this particular stigma with than my two panelists today. I am delighted to be joined by Jane Oates today, who is the president of Working Nation and a former US Department of Labor official under the Obama administration. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thrilled to be here.
And I'm also joined by Eric Rubio, who is a heavy-duty truck instructor at Duncan Polytechnical High School and a master technician and Air Force veteran. And Eric has 12 plus years experience of firsthand working in the trades and instructing students. Welcome, Eric. And I should add very quickly that I have 3 boys in my household. You would be the instant hero with all that experience that you have, because they love nothing more than trucks and cars and repairing and fixing them. So welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here, Michael.
Great. So Jane, maybe I can start with you and just if you could give us a brief introduction what Working Nation does, and then also really what I would love to do is get your initial perspective on that stigma that surrounds trade. Why do you think it is, and you know, what do you think we can do about it?
So thanks so much, Michael. Working Nation is a nonprofit media entity that was created by Art Bilger to really just tell the stories of people like Eric and his programs. You know, what are the successful programs that get people from education to work? What Cengage does every day. So I want to talk for a second about that stigma. I think we don't do enough in our homes, first of all, because the parents are where the stigma too often begins, and some of them with good reason. You know, many of them may have been victims of manufacturing leaving their area. But the other thing is media does us a great disservice. They talk about self-driving trucks like they're going to be here tomorrow, and people tell their kids, don't go into trucking, either repair or driving, because you'll be out of a job like I was. So I think between our systems and our media, we really need to do a much better job, that these jobs are not dark, dirty, and dead end. They're instead great career pathways.
Great. And I think that's a perfect segue to Eric. And Eric, if you could just inform our listeners a little bit more about what you do and what your history has been in many ways. And I would love to then tee off a question with you, but why don't you do first a brief introduction of yourself and the Polytechnical High School in Duncan?
Sure. So I have a background in the United States Air Force. I was a mechanic in the Air Force. I joined straight after high school, and that's where I got the majority of my experience. After I exited the Air Force, I taught at Universal Technical Institute. And then I found an opportunity here at Duncan Poly High School, which is a career technical education high school. It's a magnet school for our district, so students attend our school. And we have a medical academy, and we have an industrial academy. And I teach the heavy duty truck program. We also have automotive, welding, manufacturing, and construction. And so we have a lot of time with our students because we operate on a block scheduling system. So the students effectively choose a major, or they choose a pathway that they're interested in, and we carry them through their 4 years of high school dedicated to that pathway, which, you know, and we don't charge any tuition because we're a public school. So the students have a really great opportunity to learn entry-level skills and be employable directly after high school.
Great, super helpful, Eric. And let me segue into the first sort of question that I have for both of you. And let me start with you. I think it is pretty evident right now, and as many things, the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, has accelerated and made it often more evident that the shortage of skilled trade workers is really impacting the economy right now. I mean, just one data point, there is a 50%, since the beginning of the pandemic, a 50% increase in job postings for all skilled trades. And yet most of these positions remained unfilled for an extended period of time, often more than 2 or 3 months. Eric, from where you're sitting, are you seeing the same thing happening? Are you seeing an increase in demand? And what do you think contributes to that big gap between the demand for this kind of labor and the supply?
So there is a skills gap that has been occurring for quite some time. But, you know, in all of my industry partners, so I have local and regional industry partners that I have as an advisory, so that way I can make sure that I'm teaching the most relevant skills to my students, and they're all desperate for applicants. They're going so far as to even hiring from temp agencies in my industry just to perform preventative maintenance on these trucks. And, you know, I think a lot of it has to do with the awareness piece of it. You know, both students and parents, when it comes to public education, they're not aware of these job opportunities. And I don't think the proper research is occurring in high school for the students to research these employment opportunities, because there's hundreds of unfilled jobs within the heavy duty truck industry, and that's just my industry alone in my local area. And you got to think about the revenue that would be generated by these jobs, you know, the benefits, the salaries, the income tax, all of these things have a great effect on the local economy.
Yeah, and then I can give you even pulling this out to the national level. We had data from the Tech Force Foundation, which undoubtedly you're familiar with, that said there are, and this is very close to home for you, 642,000 jobs for transportation technicians currently open, and that the labor supply is around 55,000. That is a staggering gap, right? And I think you're living it and you're experiencing it day to day, and I think your illustration makes it very, very clear. Jane, that impact on the economy, you mentioned earlier, you know, it starts in the home, the stigma, it then gets transcended through the media. It's interesting to me that real and tangible impact on the economy that we're talking about somehow doesn't get popular coverage. I don't think people are aware of it. Part of the reason that we're doing this LinkedIn Live. Why do you think that is? Is it just lack of awareness, or is there something else at work here?
Well, I think there's a couple things. First, in the immediate, you know, most of these high quality programs in career and technical education had to shut down. They were so negatively impacted during COVID. You can't do hands-on unless you can be there with your instructor. And so it put a pause on the supply chain of this important workforce. But longer term, I think that we do a very poor job, and I think Eric did a great job of it, really articulating the openings and, of course, looking at the real money that these folks make. You know, people don't talk about, I don't know why we hide behind not saying facts about what people make. We should be really clear, both with young people and career transitioners, that these are stable jobs, these are quality jobs that pay a good salary and benefits in most cases, and we should be promoting them. And finally, I would say, you know, I think all of us have to do a better job of saying, in the 21st century, you are not going to make the decision to either go on for an associate's or baccalaureate degree or not at 18. That education is going to become much more approachable as you age. So you can at 18 go right from high school into a certification program, go to work, make a good salary, and have your employer share the cost of your post-secondary education, or you could make enough money that you could self-pay. So it's not an either or anymore. And I don't think we say that loud enough to families and to the students themselves.
I think it's a terrific point. Eric, are you seeing this on the ground with your students, that what Jane referred to as this lack of visibility and clarity? What could this job and this job trajectory really pay at the end of the day? And how does that stack up if I go now to a college and incur debt at the age of 18? I mean, you're dealing with a lot of 16 to 18-year-olds on a daily basis. What do you think is their awareness of this?
So a lot of their decisions, since they're young adults, are driven by their parents. So if there's a single story about the skilled trades, that you don't need a lot of technical ability to do these occupations, the pay isn't outstanding, then the decisions that are made by the student are going to be driven by the parents. So I think a lot of the awareness needs to be broadcasted out to the parents, and data should be looked at. And then now this is data that I do share with my students from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and this takes the average pay of different occupations within the country. And now one of the things that I have to talk to my students about is that this is the average, okay? So you have a portion of people that are above average, and you also have a portion of people that are below average. So when they're looking at four-year degree occupation jobs, they're just looking at the middle piece of it. And they need to look at the higher end, and they need to also look at the lower end. And in most cases, if you're very proficient in your skilled trade, you will be on the higher end of this income. And in most situations, you're going to earn more than the average person that has or possesses a four-year degree. So these jobs, and then also this is long-term employment. The trades drive our economy. They keep everything going in this country. And I can speak for the heavy-duty truck industry that the whole time during the pandemic or during COVID, trucking never stopped. This is how we get everything that we use. All of my prior graduates that are currently employed in the heavy-duty truck industry, they have been unaffected by the pandemic. Work continues, and in some cases it has even increased. And so with that increase in work, it just makes the situation more dire when it comes to the shortage of people they're trying to find in order to do these jobs.
Absolutely, Eric. And let me combine what you said, the observations that you had with the point that Jane made. If you think about the situation where you're looking at the pay scale of people and you're combining it with, there's very little supply and a lot of demand, and invariably this pay is going to go up, right? And so if you talk to your students about what the average pay has been, I think you can say with a great degree of confidence that in likelihood it's going to go up, because obviously if there is more demand than there is supply, as in every market, the rates go up. And I think that's certainly true. But I want to come back to, Jane, what you said about this, the lack of transparency about what people make. Let's look at the other side of the ledger. Let's look at that student that Eric has that is considering, well, maybe I should go into a college at 18 relative to a trade and a skill. I mean, that path is not a path to unmitigated riches immediately, right? So let me put some facts on the table. It is like the average today, anybody with a bachelor degree, the average income per year is $50,000 to $55,000. $50,000 to $55,000 per year. And the average debt that they have is $30,000. So they got to pay the debt for the education as opposed to do what Eric teaches them. And I do think there is, again, another stigma that says, well, if I do that, the traditional career degree conferring path, it's going to be, I'm going to be on a trajectory that is uncomparable to a more trades and skill based trajectory. Do you agree with that? I mean, do you think that lack of clarity about what a degree actually confers in terms of income power is true?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have really, raised the degree to a level that we think that's the only pathway to the middle class. And the reality is that not only, it's not a degree anymore. Back when I went to school, if you had a bachelor's degree, you were pretty much set to get, well, a good paying job, a quality job. Now, I was a teacher, so it was really easy for me because, as I think, schools of education are really vocational education, right? They're teaching us
Yeah.
to do a trade, an art or a trade. But the reality is that many people who graduate with certain degrees do very well. If you can go to engineering or computer science, but so many people take liberal arts degrees, which are wonderful, that make wonderfully educated citizens. But the path to a job is really amorphous with many of those degrees,
Right.
unless someone is working very hard to put work-based learning in place, to make internships part of that curriculum. So I think that for young people, we need to tell them that you can explore what you'd like to do. Instead of exploring and paying for it when you go to college, you can go to work and see what you like to do. So if you went to Eric's program and became a truck driver, you may say, oh, I really don't like this very much. I want to learn to fix these engines, or I want to learn the logistics part of this. And all of that is possible because you have transferable skills. You know a lot about that vehicle, that commercial vehicle, and you can transfer that into a number of other positions.
Yeah, and I think it's an excellent point. And Eric, I was wondering whether you have that same experience. The data seems to suggest that a lot of people are considering skilled trades later as a career change, as sort of like, I'm gonna go, whatever, I ended up somewhere and I don't like it. It's a career change, but it's a lot harder relative to what Jane was I think rightly pointing out. If you go from high school, if your students go into something where they can really experience what it is like to be in the transportation business and what it's like to drive a big truck and all of those things, the likelihood that they can then go and do something else and learn something else is much higher. The other way around is actually, it's actually much harder.
Yeah, and then that just goes to say that, 66% of students out of high school go to college. And then of those 66% of the students, 25% graduate, and then 50% of the graduates are underemployed. So you have that gray market. And then that's where you're talking about, where they have, they don't want to be underemployed. They're not utilizing the degree that they went to school for. So now they're trying to retrain in these other employment opportunities. And, I tell my students, you guys should really consider doing a self-evaluation and figuring out what it is that you're interested in, but also what are you good at? And then researching the labor market, finding where there's a shortage of employees, and then training yourself or doing what you need to do in order to obtain those skills, because then you're going to be in a situation where you have 100 job openings and not many applicants. So you are in a buyer's market effectively. For every 10 jobs that are available in the US, only one requires some kind of professional degree. 2 of them require a 4-year degree, and 7 of them require certificate-based credentials. So things like tech schools, apprenticeship programs, and the skilled trades. And that is happening now. And what we have is we've been saturated in the market with a lot of college grads and, that have degrees in markets that have more applicants than jobs available. And so we got to think about the Title IV funding that is associated with these graduates. And this affects the taxpayers. They are, utilizing the taxpayer-funded Title IV funding in order to obtain this education, but they're being underemployed, or they're not graduating, or they're not completing these programs. So it's a big issue that's happening.
It is a big issue. Now, I want to push us because I think all 3 of us made very eloquently the case why this is a problem. Now, I'm going to push the 3 of us to figure out some solutions and at least put them on the table for discussion. And let me start by saying that I am, full disclosure, somewhat biased. Some of you, Jane, I think you and I talked about this, know that I was actually born and raised in Germany, and there are 3 countries in that area, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, that have a very skill and trade focused education system. And Eric, I see you nodding. You probably know a thing or two about that. But what is really interesting, if you take a step back now, I'm not a big believer you can just transport a system from one country to the other. There are lots of things that come in. But the connectivity between employers and the education system is very, very strong there. In other words, it is expected that people are in school and in the workplace at the same time. And I think that that element, I do think, is something that we can take a page out of and figure out how we can connect the workplace more effectively to the education space. And Eric, I'd love to start with you. So have you seen examples there of things that work, and where employers, you mentioned a few in your field, take a more active approach, or what can they do more of in your mind?
So, I have a very active local industry, and they're the sole reason why I even exist. There was a group of motivated and dedicated heavy duty truck industry folks that approached the school district and said, we have a lot of funding earmarked for career technical education. We need to utilize that funding and create some infrastructure in order to be able to give the students the skills needed for these entry-level jobs, because they were just fatigued from the human resources situation where they just do not have applicants. And these are well-paid jobs. They're even going so far as, hey, you don't have to even have these entry-level skills. We want to develop our own apprenticeship program, and we'll teach you what you need to know. But having a formal education path, especially in the public education, like we have here, is really what's going to benefit the most, because then you don't have that burden of debt. But what it takes is local industry not taking no for an answer when they approach the school districts. They got together and they approached the district and said, hey, we would like to hire your students, but we need an avenue for them to gain these entry-level skills. And I think that's what needs to happen. Instead of the industries figuring out ways to market these things, or maybe feeling like they're stagnant in the hiring process, they need to approach public funded schools and tell them, hey, we would like to hire your graduates. You just need to employ a program that is able to give them those skills.
Collaboration on a local level clearly works, and your example is a case in point. Jane, if you think about pullback on the national level, I think what are the things, have you things, initiatives like what Eric is doing work? And I would add the question to this: how do we scale this? Because I mean, how we have problems in the hundreds of thousands. We don't have the problems in the hundreds, right?
Yeah, no, I think the answer is always in partnership, right? Those employers should be involved at the beginning, middle, and end of the process in programs. And, if they're telling the school what the skills are that they need, that school has the responsibility to build that skill development into their curriculum. And, I think really good programs are doing that right now. I think the other piece that I don't think we do enough of is that dead end piece that I talked about before. Oh, you're a this, you're going to be a truck driver. You don't know, you're going to be a mechanic. That's the end of the road. We need to have these employers talk about, how registered apprenticeships really work, that it's really integrating education and technical skills, that it's not for dummies. It's for really smart people. And the companies then need to talk about, through either their unions that are many, the organized labor plays a big part in many of these occupations, but there are other ways. Michael, Volkswagen well. I mean, Volkswagen doesn't have a union necessarily. They have a work council, but anybody who has a labor market partnership on their work site should be telling young people how much those employers invest in them after they come to work for them, so that there's continuous education, continuous growth, and with that, continuous salary improvement. You don't necessarily have to work more hours, to make more money. Obviously, we all love overtime when we're in those kinds of positions, but you don't have to do that, because you can move up the skill scale and earn more money per hour, or more, a better yearly salary.
Yeah, no question. And I do think that this notion of the employer taking a more active and continuous role, not just looking at like, oh, how do I recruit people? And Erica said that I have a problem recruiting people. Now help me figure out that problem. But more thinking about the evolution, to your point, Jane, of the individual through the company and what they can do to reskill and upskill, I think is something we're hearing at Cengage, particularly with our Ed2Go business, where employers are taking a more active role in the continuing education of their employees, as opposed to just looking at intake and then sort of turnover of employees. And I think there are some powerful recent examples. So it's not all doom and gloom. But for instance, the moves that Amazon has made. I mean, they're being criticized a lot for a lot of different things, but the fact that they have said, well, if you're working for Amazon, we will allow you to get a college degree if you're so inclined, and you have the necessary experience within Amazon in maybe a much more career and technical field, will allow you to get a college degree, and we will pay for that. So I think there are some shoots of hope that the employers are also taking this in a very different way. Eric, my question in a way back to you is, what did you see as the education system? And you're talking from a high school perspective. What needs to change? I mean, already at Duncan, you have changed a lot of things, right? I mean, you've talked to the employers, you have implemented a program that they are saying, hey, we want to have those graduates, et cetera. Is there anything else on your wish list that you wish would be different going forward?
So, we need to be a feeder school to the local community colleges. So there should be a program where my students should be able to seek opportunities for higher education after they exit the program here. And so the local community college is in development of a heavy duty truck program, and they're building an entire new satellite campus so the students can take advantage of that. And then I will be offering dual enrollment. So the students won't have to start from scratch in that program. They'll get dual enrollment credit here. And so that pushes them to that associate's degree program. And that's just really going to be the end of their formal education, because directly after that, they really need to obtain the skills. So the hands-on competencies. Now, when we're talking about the trades, the formal education piece of it can only go so far, and the work experience is going to have to take over. And what are the smarter what a lot of the smarter industry partners are doing is that those technicians or those tradespeople that are considering retiring, they're keeping them on as full-time trainers, and they're creating their own apprenticeship programs within their business. And that is going to benefit them, because then they get to grow those employees from entry level to journeyman, and then they can, reap the benefits of that. So instead of having all of that knowledge leave the company, they're retaining those employees for full-time trainers. And to speak to what Jane was talking about earlier, my students do participate in an unpaid internship program once a week when they're in 12th grade. So they go and they work at these job site locations one day a week to get them exposed to the actual work environment. This also gives them an opportunity to try on, this industry and see if it's a good fit for them. Now, I train my students. The basis of my program is heavy duty truck technology. So that's the technician piece of it. But the industry as a whole needs employees. So when they go to job site, I don't restrict them to working in the shop. If they have an interest in working in the parts department, if they want to see what the service advising part of the business is, or even though I don't teach it, even the auto body side of it, I don't create restrictions for them. So they can go and see if that's a good fit for them. But I want them to have a level of awareness where they know that they're going to enjoy it.
And I'd be curious, when they come back to the classroom, Eric, from those job sites, do you find them to be better, more interested students, or don't you see a difference there?
So I see both. So I see it both ways. I have students that come back and can't wait for next week, and then I have students that come and approach me and say, "Hey, Mr. Rubio, this isn't a good fit for me.
Okay.
What else can I do?"
That's valuable.
Yeah, and I tell them there's nothing wrong with that. And from an HR standpoint, it's very time consuming and it's very expensive to bring somebody on board and then have them quit, a month or two later. So they really enjoy the fact that they get to basically have an in-person interview process for months on end. And then these 95% of my students that have found employment directly after graduation, this is how they got that employment, because that employer has approached them and said, hey, we're very impressed with your work ethic and your attitude, and we would like to know if you want to work here full time. We just need you to graduate high school.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this is a great moment that we can actually transition to some audience questions, and we have solicited questions before, and I'll start with those, and we'll see others, how many we can get to. But one of the questions that I thought was particularly interested is, what are the other barriers from your perspective to enter into trades beyond the stigma? And some examples that people were citing: discrimination against African American, discrimination against women, academic preparation for challenging certification tests. What's your take, Jane? Let's start with you. What are other barriers to entry?
So look, I think that one about race and gender is real, especially when we look backwards. But people need to look at the demographics of the trades now. It's changing, right? And it's changing pretty rapidly. So we need to be really clear and approach that and talk to female students about what are the challenges they may face. Certainly female students of color are used to being the only one in a room. But, there's so many professions now that as a person of color, or certainly a woman of color or a woman, you're going to be in situations, academic and vocational, where there are not a lot of other people that look like you. And I think education has to do a better job of preparing people for how to behave and thrive in that kind of environment. The other thing, I would say is a big disincentive. If, the federal legislation that funds career and technical education, the Perkins Act, talks about the fact that vocational teachers need to integrate academics into their program. So they need to always be looking at that academic link. There is no parallel language, I am ashamed to say, in the Elementary and Secondary Ed Act that says to academic teachers, they have a responsibility to integrate the application of what they're teaching into their day-to-day work. And if you think about it, Michael and Eric, you've both done the same thing. We buy Lincoln Logs and Legos for our kids, and we really we make them do puzzles because we know they have to do things with their hands. We teach them to love doing things with their hands until they get to school. And then about middle school, we say, oh, you only have to go into those programs if you aren't good in academics. And some teachers even go so far as to say awful things, like if you don't work harder in your math class, you're going to have to go into the CTE track. And the reality is you better work hard in your math class because you need math and CTE.
Right. Eric, you seem to agree with that. Any other, I think, barriers that you can think of that your students are facing to get into a well-paying job in the trades?
So we're making some headway within our district with the awareness of career technical education opportunities, but I think there, other districts aren't faring so well in that. So, I think it's just, and to say something about the school that I work at, it used to be a middle school. So it's so unassuming that we even have these programs here when you drive by them. So if we didn't do a lot of outreach with the 8th grade students and going to the elementary schools, I don't think that we would have the enrollment that we currently have now. So, I think the majority of the challenges that are being faced is that the awareness piece of it. The students and the parents do not know that there are career tech ed opportunities, and that with the attainment of the skills, there are lucrative ways, in order to gain employment. So it's just that, and then to speak to, the gender and the race piece of it, 10% of my senior class is female students. Now, I have a situation where I have 2 industry partners, excellent women that lead their organizations. They're both owners of nationally known truck manufacturer brands. And so when I have young women in my class, they can look up to them and say, hey, you know what, I can do this too. This isn't a men's only occupation or a men's only industry. And then it's just important that we have those role models and we get those industry partners involved and give them opportunities to speak to our students, and then we're going to see that gap close up.
Absolutely, and power of role models is very, very powerful. But Eric or Jane, both of you on academic preparation for challenging certification tests. I think Jane, you touched on it a little in that you said, you know, it needs to be integrated, and it's probably not integrated enough into the traditional academics. Eric, are you seeing that problem? Are you seeing students coming to you and saying like, geez, I'm not really well prepared for that certification test, or you're not really seeing that in your school because you're doing a better job at it?
Well, I think as a nation, we're having some problems with the literacy piece of it. So, you know, a lot of these certifications have complex text in them. And, you know, I have to emphasize the vocabulary. So that's one of the challenges too, because the terminology within my industry, I have to really emphasize that. So that way the students can be successful when they take their entry level certification. So I have my students do complete OSHA 10. You know, it's a 10-hour OSHA training course, and that's just going to give them a strong foundation on safety. There's a lot of lingo in there. There's a lot of industry specific references, and the traditional A through G academic rigor doesn't necessarily prepare them for that. You know, I have to do some preparation. And then along with the ASC entry level tests that I give my students, which are industry level certifications, I have to make sure that they're prepared for that. Now, there are books that you can read to prepare, but you know, the education that they're receiving is not necessarily tailored to those. And so that's one of the things that we need to work on as well.
Yeah.
And Michael, you think about these instructors, these faculty members that are teaching career and vocational ed, time is their enemy, right? The kids are sometimes bused there. They only have so many hours. They don't come every day, or they come for part of the day. There's a real responsibility for academic teachers as they're teaching test taking skills to include these certification tests as some part of that, you know, readiness. Everybody gets lots of prep on ACT or the SAT, but these are important things because I think people in all fields will be taking certification tests throughout their career. So it's not just to, you know, to kind of banter with the CTE folks right now, but this is an important responsibility for educators to see that certifications are going to be a part of everyone's life moving forward. And we should be including the way those tests are formatted into the preparation when we talk about test preparation to our students.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you, Jane and Eric. And I would just add from one other element in terms of solutions to the challenges that we face. I think we also need to make aggressive use of technology that allows us right now to really take care of those time constraints that Jane, that you are articulating, and Eric, you are seeing. I think we need to make it more flexible. So we at Cengage, with our Ed2Go business, we're allowing people to get skills in very specific trades, whether it's electrician, transportation, etc., in collaboration with the community colleges, right? They come to the community colleges. They don't want to get a traditional degree. They come to us as a result of it. And we're allowing them the flexibility to do it, you know, like a few hours at night, because they have a job during the day, or we're allowing them the test prep, you know, at the times and the intervals that they need. And then added on to this is this, you know, the link between the academic lingo, and I think, Eric, you pointed it out very eloquently. There are certain things, certain foundational things that they gotta do to take those tests. So I do think using technology in a way to bring education to the students, as opposed to waiting for the students to come to the education environment. I think if we can get the right blend there, I think we can make a lot of progress and make it easier and more accessible. So with that, the next question that I've gotten was, how has the COVID pandemic impacted the approach to trade education? Eric, from your perspective, I mean, it must have been a rough 18 months, no matter what, but tell us a little bit how COVID has impacted what you've seen happening.
So with the online scheduling that the students had to experience, since I operate on a block schedule, so I don't have a traditional 45-minute class. My 12th grade students, they participate in a consecutive 3 periods all afternoon. So directly after lunch, they spend all afternoon with me. And that's how we're able to do the internship programs. And then also the juniors as well. They have 2 consecutive periods. Now with the distance learning piece of it, my instructional time was effectively cut down. I only met with my students for half of the planned time that I normally would. And it translated to 8 months of lost instructional time, not to mention, they received no hands-on competencies. And so I effectively see that year as it being lost, you know. So my 12th grade students that are attending my class this year, I've had to start them from scratch because I just don't feel that they're ready to move on to the next piece of it. And so when it came to career technical education, I don't really, you know, hindsight's always 20/20, but the nature of the trades is that you must achieve those hands-on competencies. So I think we could have done a better job in making sure that students receive that in some form or fashion, whether it's small groups, small cohorts, you know, but it should have been an essential piece of the education business to make sure that the students were able to obtain those skills.
Yeah.
And Michael,
Jane,
you've heard a
any
lot about,
observations?
yeah, I mean, you've heard a lot about learning loss, and nobody's talking about this technical competencies loss at the national level the way they should be, because we should be funneling money so that if teachers like Eric were willing to teach Saturdays, if they were willing to teach, you know, during school breaks to get these kids the technical skills that they needed, we should be providing the funding for that. And I say that not because I'm a recovering teacher. I say that instead because it's an economic reality. We've all experienced the, you know, the whole problem of shortages. We see what's happening, you know, from the beginning with paper products, but now if you know anyone who's tried to order an appliance, the wait list is unbelievable. And that's because we don't have the skilled tradespeople to have these places operate, you know, 3 shifts, and we don't have the skilled people to repair and drive these trucks to get things moving. So when we talk about logistical problems, it's a labor problem, and we could solve that with some of these young people to get them what they needed, and certainly solve it with some older, you know, your community college students had that same hands-on learning loss. We should be doing the same thing with them.
No question about it. And I think that learning loss that both you and Eric articulated, I think is again a call for me to really get more creative around how we deliver learning. If you know, hopefully we're not going to get into another pandemic quite like that, but at some point, Eric, I'm sure there are ways that you can use simulations for other things, and you know, not obviously substitute for the hands-on learning, but at least not just have 50% of your time being wasted because you couldn't access students. So I do think there is a lot to be learned there. Jane, Eric, let me first thank you very profoundly for participating in this very interesting discussion. I am very confident that we've moved the discussion forward, and we have provided, to your earlier point, Jane, hopefully some visibility to something that I think will be a real pillar of the economic recovery of this country. And if we don't take it seriously, I think we only have ourselves to blame. And I do think we now have the tools, and most of all, we have the passion of people like Eric and his colleagues, and of Jane, you on a policy side. So we will be answering more questions on LinkedIn Live that came in that we couldn't get to. But for now, I just want to thank both of you for your time and your insights. It's been an absolute pleasure. And for me, given that I grew up in Germany, it was a little bit of a homecoming. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks,
Eric.
Thank you both. Thanks, Eric.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.